Yes, sir. we back. Let's get it. Yep. Yes, sir. We back. What episode is this again? Remember?
62.
62. Let's get it. You ready?
Yep.
All right, yo, what's up? It's your boy D Starks Artist. And you are now tuned in to the Just Different Podcast, where we talk everything faith, life, and culture. If you're tuning in for the first time, welcome. And if you've been rocking with us for a while, welcome back. We're so glad to have you. I hope everybody's having a good week. A great week, in fact, actually. Let me add that. But what I wanted to mention is we actually we got off live. We went live yesterday.
Yeah.
Right. We told y'all last week that we're going live every Wednesday for the rest of the year. We finally picked the time. It's going to be 8 p.m. Eastern.
Mm-hmm.
We decided that last night. I know we were saying 8 or 9. 8 p.m. Eastern every Wednesday for the rest of the year. Last night was a lot of fun, so I appreciate everybody tuning in, tapping in with us. We're able to have some of y'all on, just ask a few questions, which was dope. I think somebody asked us, what they asked us? The first, Naya, first person that came on.
Oh, some stories, like childhood stories of us.
I think she wanted us to answer, or she asked us, yo, what is our favorite childhood memories or stories, like between the both of us, like our siblings or whatever. And that was fun, because that like brought up a lot of old memories and stuff that I almost have
That's
forgotten
what I'm saying.
Yeah, and she said, yo, I should make an EP out of that. Like an entire like episode. I was like, yo, that's actually a good idea.
It's a great idea.
That may be something we do like before the end of the year, just like a story time thing. Because who you said did that?
Oh, with the Perrys.
Oh, Jackie and Preston.
Yep.
Yeah, that would actually be fire. I feel like theirs was probably funny too. I didn't get to see it. Did you watch it?
Very funny. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's most of Preston, his stories.
For real?
Yeah. He grew up in Chicago, so he got some crazy stories.
No, for a fact, I imagine. But no, yeah. But let's go ahead and tap in straight into
Let's go.
For this episode. So we originally coming into this episode, I think we were going to probably touch on something along the lines of like toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
And the difference between that and biblical masculinity, and kind of comparing the two and what healthy manhood looks like.
Right.
Just like in life and the culture from a biblical standard and point of view. But we're going through it and I'm thinking about it. And one day, I don't know if it was like a few days ago or really last week, I'm going through our Instagram DMs and the message that we get. And we get so many nowadays, and we're doing a lot more, so we don't get to like answer them as frequently as we used to. But I'm glad I did. I came across this one, and someone had basically kind of like sent in a suggestion for an episode, and then I'm just going to read the message. But it said, "Hi, hope you guys are doing great. I stumbled upon a video on TikTok that was addressing how some Christians romanticize going through a wild phase so that they can have a testimony or feel like they have been saved from the world, especially people who grew up in the church. If you are spoken on this, then I'll probably catch up on the episode since I'm a little behind, but if not, it would be really nice to hear from your views." And that was like so timely, because me and Jordan just had a conversation with our mom not too long ago about that, about how sometimes some people don't feel like their testimony is as valued or validated or real when they're looking at it in comparison to someone who may have gone through something more traumatic or like dire. And whenever she sent that, she actually had attached a TikTok video to it, referencing that she referenced, and I wanted to play that too because it was super profound and so dope. So I'm gonna play like the first minute or like 30 seconds, like minute of it.
I'm one of them kids that grew up in church my whole life. My dad was an elder in the church. My mom was highly respected in the church. I don't have a day where I can point to and say, this was the day I dedicated my life to Christ. I've just known him my whole life. That's not to say I was living for him my whole life, but I've known him my whole life. I knew the word, I knew the scripture, I knew all the worship songs. Jesus has always been a part of my life. And that's one thing that's always kind of held me back from walking in what God has called me to, is I wanted to create a testimony, a story that would captivate people. Like I wanted the thing, the wow factor. You ever been in church and it's Testimony Sunday and somebody is telling you about how they used to be criminal, doing some real nasty stuff, and like radically God changed them? A part of me was always jealous that like I don't have that story to share. I've always felt called to use my voice to in turn point glory back to God, but I didn't know how, because the only real examples that I ever seen of it Sorry, there was a fly. I didn't like that. But the only examples that I had really seen of it where people were really wowed by the Holy Spirit was when those testimonies came. And over the last
Yeah, so he goes on and explains a lot more in that video.
Yeah.
But I thought that was like extremely profound. And that's what basically the topic of this video is going to be, or at least this episode is going to be, is really what it, like, romanticizing maybe even the gospel, our testimonies, and how we do that in the church. And I think the question really becomes is like, how do I use my voice to point glory back to God? Like my voice, my testimony, my story, what I have been, or rather have not gone through, is still use that to like point that back to him in his name for the most part. And in that video that I just played, he eventually goes on to say that he's watching Tim Ross, and he had said something in what he was listening to, and it said that there's only two types of testimonies. One's where God brought you through something, and the other's where he keeps you from something. And in his case, which is something that I definitely relate to, is the fact that God didn't have to save him from anything radical because he kept him from that.
Right.
And I think that's something, like I mentioned earlier, that we definitely have to keep in mind, that he's going to use every voice, every story, every timeline, no matter what that looks like, to bring glory back to him. And I know growing up, I had a very, very similar like parallel to what he was explaining, and that's why I want to talk about it today, because it was like, I was very much fortunate and blessed and grateful to have like a 2-parent household of two individuals that really loved each other, right? Just weren't co-parenting, but had love for one another that obviously translated to how they loved us extremely well. And I didn't necessarily have any extreme traumatic or crazy like dramatic event that happened in my life that kind of like threw me really off course, all kilter. Now, of course, like, going through middle school, high school, I had the things that I struggled with when it comes to like insecurity, lust, like identity issues, or whatever that looks like. But it wasn't anything very severe that I may have felt, I saw my other peers going through. And so that didn't make me as confident in my testimony, because like I had like knew God, right? And hadn't, when I did really start my relationship with for the first time, it was like I hadn't necessarily been through anything crazy. And so that made me devalue what God had done in my life, because I'm looking at it in comparison to like all these other things that he brought other people out of. And so I wasn't like as confident, that I didn't feel as like it was as valid or as praised, because usually like those other stories, as they should be, were like more highlighted, put on a spotlight and a pedestal, rather than someone who may have been in the church their entire life and just had like been kept from all that things, lived pure or whatever. So yeah, I just thought that was super important, because I know I had that experience. You can talk on yours too.
I'm glad we're talking about this, because I feel like I honestly haven't really heard this topic talked about, and I love that TikTok video too. But I have a very similar experience. Like, I agree with everything you said. And I remember we were talking with our mom, like you said, and the specific question she had asked me, she was like, do you like regret like the childhood you had, or like would you have changed anything? And then I told her like, not now, but like when I was younger, like I kind of wish I had like some sort of traumatic experience or something happened in my life, because that's all I was hearing, like with these testimonies and everything. And for the longest time, I felt like I didn't have a testimony, because even
that's the
I
one.
I didn't even think I had one, which was crazy. And it was really more in the way it was described to me. It was described like, your testimony is your story about what God brought you through. But like you mentioned about what Tim Ross said, it's not just what he brought you through, but what he what he kept you from, and what he kept from you. And that's something I didn't realize at the time. You know what I mean? Because like you said, that's all you're seeing in the pulpits and when people are giving their testimonies. And even for me, deeper than that, it was kind of like a relatability thing. Because I don't know if you've ever heard this, but sometimes when I was trying to minister to people or get to know them better and try to give them advice on something, I would get like you don't understand. And sometimes it wasn't blatantly said, but it was like, they were like, oh, you don't get it, bro. Like, you didn't go through what I went through. And low key stuff like that kind of hurt, because as someone who's genuinely trying to help you out, you know what I mean? And like, I just want to be there for you and help you, and you hit me with like, oh, you don't get it. That even led me to the thoughts of like, dang, I wish I had a situation like this so I could relate to people, so that I can
more credible,
right? Because so that's just me personally. On a deeper level, it was more of just like I wanted to relate to people and kind of, you know what I'm saying, but in that sense, and get that open door into their lives.
That makes a lot of sense, and that's the part that I had missed and didn't have language for. But it's like I didn't even feel like I actually had a testimony, because I think sometimes growing up in the church specifically, you have those testimony services, sort of points where people are giving their story or sharing how they came to God. It almost felt as if like it had to look a certain way. Like my encounter with God, or how I took the first steps to actually knowing Him, or
Right.
saying yes to that relationship and being in complete obedience to Him, had to come on the back of something that was just completely like far left. And like we keep saying, just maybe traumatic or very like dramatic circumstances or whatever. And so I never even felt like I had one. But like I said, God obviously will use anything and everything. And I think some people are probably in that same position too, in terms of like there's not even one there.
Right. And I think it comes from this mindset. I think we've started to look at God more like a deliverer and less like a protector. Or it's like we value Him more as a deliverer, it seems so. And I think in a way we've subconsciously thought that, because when you're trying to evangelize to people and spread the gospel, people like proof. And I feel like you can't see what God's kept you from. Does that make sense? So you can't see what He's kept you from, but you can see what He's brought you through. So when you're evangelizing to people, it makes more sense to show God as a deliverer in most cases, because people like to see stuff that's like proven, because it's like, okay, you went from that to that. I can see that. That's tangible. I can see that. You can't see what God's kept you from. You know what I mean? I can't, that's not tangible. I can't put my eyes on that. And I know even as believers, we understand that a big part of what we do is faith-based, but maybe there's a part of us that's like, we're still stuck on like what we're seeing. And that's a reason why we value God more as a deliverer and less like a protector. We don't see the things He's protecting us from. So it's kind of like it goes unnoticed, right? And it doesn't go talked about, you know?
Yeah. And even with, like you said, that I guess that comparison or contrast with Him being a protector but also a deliverer, and that's like putting more weight or value on the deliverer piece. I think it's even if you haven't gone through something that the God had to like just like completely like drag you out of specifically, there's still like your testimony and what He protects you from is still hope for something, for someone else, right? In terms of like, oh wow, like you see an individual who maybe grew up like in a 2-parent household that had love, that had care around them, that was raised in the right way, right? And that may be not necessarily drawing you to necessarily envy or what you felt like was missing, but like hope for what you can have as well, right?
Good.
And that being the standard, right? Like, so that's why like it's important. Okay, God kept you from things, and your testimony is like the standard for where God hopes everyone could be at. You know? And so it's not like, it's not like you being in that position of maybe not have gone through anything crazy and you saying like, oh, I'm so much better, or putting yourself on a pedestal. But like your testimony is still in some ways hope for so many people, whether you realize it or not.
And I think that needs to become the standard. I like that you said that. I love that. It needs to become the standard, because I think what has happened is like it's the radical story has become the normal, right? And not to cut you off, but I guess we mentioned this before, but the idea of like it being romanticized and idealized, right? It's like we almost feel as if, you have to go through something, right,
in order for you to find God.
Or you're not even a valid,
right? Like you have to be at your lowest points. Like not everyone found God in their lowest.
That's right.
Not everyone found God at the valley, in the valley.
Yeah.
Right. And I think sometimes I know I had that misconception too, because I would even in my evangelism, when I would talk to people or whatever, like I never knew how to talk to individuals who weren't depressed or weren't going through something severe,
right,
weren't going through a heartbreak, because I felt like that was the only point of contact where God could actually be known or found. And that's just not the case.
It's not.
Right. But sometimes, growing up in the church and hearing all these different things from different people, you feel as if that is how it should be, and that's not like the particular standard. Like you're putting God in the box of like, oh, He can only be found there.
I'm thinking of a specific like instance in my own life. I'm gonna be completely transparent. I remember one time, so I don't drink, right, but I drunk one time, right, or a couple times, and the main reason I did it is because this conversation right here, like I felt like when it came to stuff like that, it's such a prevalent thing in our generation, right? Drinking and like all of that. And I felt like literally a part of me was like, dang, I just can't relate to people. And I feel like I can't, how can I help? How can I talk to them? It's crazy how like something so dysfunctional, will get rationalized in your mind, right? Based off the stuff that you're seeing. So I literally rationalized the idea. I was like, I'm gonna just go drink. I'm just to see so I can relate to people. And that wasn't the way to go. I'm telling you right now, You learn from my mistakes. That wasn't the way to go, but
you was off the drink.
I was, and I shouldn't have done it. But I'm just saying that was one example of like what I did to try to create like a testimony or create like that point of relatability. And I'm glad. I think because that can go so south. Like I'm glad it didn't go wrong. But like who knows? I could have turned into an alcoholic or something because that is a reality that could happen. But God protect me from that. But I think that's something me personally. You ever done something crazy?
And in terms of
Just to try
to create
to
testimony,
like, yeah, it's like try to go out and like force it or like do something that you knew you shouldn't have been in.
I mean, I can't think of anything specific right now, but I can
think so?
I definitely have for sure.
Okay,
right. Which is so counterintuitive.
It is
right?
So, but that's what I'm saying.
You're trying to be a testament to help people get out of their sin by getting in sin.
Getting in it, it's crazy.
Makes no sense.
I think it's a trick of the enemy. Like just trying to like finesse us into doing stuff.
And
you
just
know what
devalue
I mean?
like what God has actually done for you.
Exactly.
At the end of the day, in his actual power. And I heard this once, and I don't know if I've mentioned this on a podcast, but this actually helped me out a lot. It's the fact that Jesus was never sick. He was never possessed. He was never in any point of like, you look at the people that he had healed and or delivered. He never necessarily possessed those same things. Like I said, he wasn't ever possessed with anything. He was never in need of like tragic healing,
right?
But yet he had power over it all, right? And so the point there is the fact that even if you haven't necessarily experienced or gone through that specifically, doesn't limit the power and or the influence you have to speak to somebody in that situation to help them get out of it. And I don't know where I remember hearing that from, but that definitely changed my entire perspective on it because he was never sick. He never was possessed. He never had leprosy, but he still had power over it all. And so with that being said, you don't have to necessarily have gone through that specific moment or that specific experience or that time of life or period of life for you to still have the power to speak to somebody in that situation and bring them out of it. Because God's going to guide you, His Spirit's going to guide you for you to be able to say and or speak or give wisdom to somebody else's situation. That's how I feel about even like our platform, like even being so young. It's like, we're like inspiring, encouraging people that are like, twice our age or extremely older that like, have kids that have, careers and jobs that we have not necessarily gone through. Yet God, like through His Spirit, right, and as we're obeying Him, is using us as vessels to like speak to that, right? So it's just a lie and things we try to rationalize, like you said. Exactly. That, you can still, God will still give you the influence, right, and the power and the words to say and the wisdom in order to speak to different people in different situations that you haven't gone through.
That's a bar. Where'd you say you heard that from?
I don't know.
That's a bar though. I like that. There's a lot of hope in that. I never heard that. You're actually speaking to me, but
you haven't?
No, I haven't.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I kind of wrote something along the lines of that, but not that. You said it very eloquently. You know what I'm saying?
I got you.
That's a big word. But anyways, something else I feel like I've noticed, which plays a big part into this, is I feel like in general, I feel like I see a lot of people like parading their like trauma around or like wearing it like a badge of honor in a way. I've seen like several like TikTok trends kind of like centered around something like that, and like people are making it seem as if it's something that's fun, you know what I'm saying, and something that's enjoyable and something that's cool. And I feel like even when you feel like you're the minority or you feel like most people have that extreme story or they have that trauma, you feel like you're doing something wrong. Does that make sense? I think as people, we're geared towards numbers. So if I'm in the minority and there's a big group of people over there making it seem like they're having a fun, dandy time, I'm going to feel like I'm doing something wrong. When in all reality, like I'm not, So I think that's a part of it as well. People wearing it, you know what I mean? Like it's something to be proud of. And I'm not trying to, downplay their situations. I know people go, try to cope with things differently, but I just think that plays into it too. You can't fall into that trick of feeling like because I'm not in that group that I'm doing it wrong or that I have to follow where the numbers are type of thing. Because I think that's even a trick of the enemy trying to like normalize like dysfunction and making it seem like that's the normal. So that's something else I've noticed and that you got to stay away from.
No, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. No, but do you, what was I about to ask you? Do you feel like you romanticize stuff? I think I asked you this right before the podcast.
Yeah, I couldn't really think of anything I felt like I romanticized, like overly romanticized. You know what I mean? I feel like there's some things that you naturally romanticize, like, the idea of like, a family and stuff like that. But
what do you mean family?
Like a wife, kids, settling down.
The white picket fence is crazy.
Getting a nice
White
little
picket fence
crib
is crazy.
Like I feel like that's just a romantic thing though. That's like naturally something you romanticize. I think there's some things that can be overly romanticized though. But
What do you mean? So wait, so my next question was: Is it a bad thing?
To
So we're
romanticize?
talking about like I guess obviously romanticizing, particular like testimonies, or
Yeah.
rather like just romanticize the idea of like you having to come to God from a place from a dark place, which obviously doesn't have to be the case, right? So what do you think it can be a bad thing sometimes? Over romanticizing things.
I think over romanticizing things is always a bad thing.
Okay.
Because I think what can happen is it construes the reality of things when you over romanticize something. You know what I mean? And it blinds you from what it actually is. So I mean, for example, something you had brought up is just like how with our generation, something that's romanticized is like the idea of like being a thug or like living a street life, and you know what I mean, being about that life. That's something that's romanticized when it shouldn't be, right? I think stuff like, you know what I'm saying, that's just an example. Stuff like that, I think if something gets romanticized, or especially something that's inherently shouldn't be, I think it's always bad.
Why do you think people do it?
I think that goes back into my point about like people that paraded their trauma around, stuff like that. It's all about how you present it. I think if someone is presenting something a certain way, and I'm seeing a lot of people present it the same way, like it's fun, like it's enjoyable, and I've never had that experience, I mean, what else am I supposed to assume about it? You know what I mean? Like I can use my context who's like, oh, maybe it's not fun, but like, dang, everybody else is saying it is. Like, so it's in the way that people are presenting it, right? I think that's a big part of it.
That's fair.
Yeah.
And that makes sense. I think like even with what you mentioned with like, I guess like street culture,
Yeah.
right? Or this idea, particularly like with like males or men, that like having some bodies by your name, right? Going on that ride,
Yeah.
You feel what I'm saying? Like literally being in the streets or whatever is somewhat romanticized in the sense of like, that sounds backwards, like, but in the sense that it's idealized rather, right? Or even when we talk about hustle culture, when we talked not too long ago about burnout and literally working yourself tirelessly, like in all hours of the night, not getting sleep, quote unquote, like sacrificing, what I have to do here at the cost of like my mental health, my time with family and friends or whatever. That's romanticized as well. It's like, oh yeah, bro, like I put in like 70 hours last week. Like, fam, that's not normal.
Go to sleep, bro.
You know what I'm saying? Oh yeah, like I'm in the streets, I'm about to get my ops, right? You know what I mean? Like you being paranoid and having to be anxious 24/7,
like,
not knowing if you're gonna make it back home.
Right.
That's not cool, fam.
It's not, bro.
It's not cool. But like you said, I think it definitely matters how you present something, right? The presentation of it is gonna like to set that standard, or at least a cultural standard for like how it should be like received or accepted, and what it actually is, or what people will think it actually is.
I guess what do you think a way around that would be, like in terms of like presenting it? Like how do you get around that? Because I mean, what'd you say?
Presenting what?
If let's just keep going with like the street culture example. Like,
okay,
if people are presenting that in the way that they're presenting it, like how do you get around that? Like if because I don't know, the way I look at it is like, if that's all I'm seeing and I've never been there, like how do you tell what's real from what's not, if that makes sense? You know what I mean?
That's a good question. How do you tell from what's real from what's not? I think it is partially, I mean, it's getting eyes on like the right narrative.
Okay.
If that makes sense. I think the people who necessarily romanticize or idealize these things aren't the people who are actually in them. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
You feel what I'm saying? So like, you know what I mean? Like if you find someone who is like actually a part of that life, we're talking about about like gang culture, individuals in the streets, like you come across a lot of individuals who don't want to be in that.
Right. And they'll tell
they
you
would have rather them have another path out, right?
Yeah.
As an individual, talking to people like that, you feel what I'm saying? So there's the people who are maybe seeing that like 1% of individuals who are the loudest, most outspoken, are highlighted about like, oh yeah, I'm out here doing X, Y, and Z, right? When they're actually probably not even like in that particular ecosystem,
not even really doing
part of that culture,
right?
And making it seem as if it's something that's like, or at least glorifying it in a way that makes it seem like very pleasant and pleasurable when it's not. So I think it's just getting, like, highlighting like the people who are actually in that.
That's a good point.
With in terms of like voices and things like that.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
On all ends too, right? Even with the whole hustle culture example, like like actually speaking to people who live that and doing it consistently, and them telling you like, yo, like I remember I just talked to somebody not too long ago who had this amazing job as a salesman, making like, I don't know, 300,000 like per year off commission or whatever, but was absolutely miserable mentally, with his family, emotionally, like, but working all the time.
Right.
You know what I mean? 70, 80 hours a week.
Right.
So the people who are actually in it, I feel like aren't the ones necessarily promoting it.
That makes sense.
Right?
That makes
sense.
So
changing the narrative of that is, giving the other voices that recognition or highlighting that more than anything.
That's important. And I think that's even bigger now with social media. I feel like I see a lot of, I don't mean to take this conversation like left field, but you see a lot of people like trying to capitalize or like monetize off stuff like that. You know what I mean? Especially like you see like people in like the music industry, like that's all they're talking about. Like, you know what I'm saying? They're talking about a life they're not living, and they're doing it to capitalize off of it and get popular off of it and get money off of it, and selling a false narrative that they're not even in. Now, you know what I'm saying? Now you're tricking these people, and now they're thinking it's fun when you're not even in it. So it's like, yeah, that's definitely important. Just getting eyes on the people that are actually living it, for sure. That's a good point.
Yeah, so I mean, even bringing that back, I think it's about the proper presentation like of God and what this walk looks like holistically, of having different voices of people that are highlighted that may have not necessarily had that, very dramatized, not in that way, like they dramatize it, but just more like elaborate past or whatever, and also highlighting individuals that God like had kept and may have just had like a different experience, and so I think going back to the presentation of it and highlighting different voices, like we were just mentioning with those examples, it's the same. It's the same in that sense of like, okay, like let's not put God in this particular box, right? So people, you know what I mean, like we did, like growing up with the perception of like, oh, it can only look like this, right? So it's highlighting different individuals that may have a different testimony of like, maybe growing up in a 2-parent household, and having like an elementary, middle, and high school like span of their life that was very much positive, and reinforces the belief that there is hope and God can give you like peace, prosperity, and joy in these different situations and just in life in general. So I think that's a part of that conversation as well, of like just presenting God in a holistic way, that there's different points of context where you can meet him at, and find him in the valley or the mountaintop, and it's not mutually exclusive in any way.
I like that
for a fact.
I think they balance each other very well if they're both used equally. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like people in the valley need to see that he shows up on the mountain as well, and vice versa. So it's like, they balance out each other very well if they're both represented like they need to be.
Yeah.
So that's why we need more people like, you know what I'm saying, like us, which I think is good that God got us out of that mindset of like we don't have testimonies and they're not important, to like go up and like to tell people like, and not be afraid of it, like, yo, no, I don't have a crazy, this, that, and the other. So yeah. People stepping up and talking about
it. And not to say that we haven't gone through anything at all.
Right.
Also, disclaimer that we're gone through anything or we're better than the next person or Christian because of whatever. But it's just the reality of like what our life looked like. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like we definitely had things that we went through, but it wasn't necessarily what it may have been for other people.
Right.
And that's for every individual person too. Like your story matters.
It matters. Point blank, period.
And your testament is still proof.
Yeah.
Regardless of what it looks like.
Proof is proof.
It's still proof.
It's still proof, bro.
Is that I don't know. Is that the title? We didn't have one, so
that's the title. Y'all, we didn't have a title for this. It's still proof.
It's still proof. Think that works?
I like that.
Flows well.
No, I like that.
It's
that.
Still proof.
It's still proof.
Your testimony is still proof, regardless of what it looks like. That's at the end of the day. That's what sums it all up. For a fact, he'll use it all. I like that. You got anything else for the people?
I think that's it, bro.
Nothing else, no gems. Closing remarks.
No, I think that's it, bro.
That's crazy.
What?
But no, yeah. Your testimony is still proof, and he's gonna use every little part of your story, right? When we talked about in why not you? Wait, what was the title of that episode?
Why not be you?
Why not be you? He's gonna use every integral detail and part of what you've been through and what you've gone through in your life up until this point for his glory. No matter what that looks like, no matter how small or like minuscule it looks to you, it's a big deal.
It's a big
And that's
deal.
it. It's still proof.
It's still proof.
It's still
I
proof.
promise you it is.
So look, man, we appreciate y'all. Come back. We'll be here, same time next week. You know what
Yeah,
it
we
is.
gonna
We'll
be
be
here,
live
man.
next week,
Hey.
Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern.
Yeah.
Tap in. IG Live. We're going to be there, man. I'd love to see y'all there. We appreciate y'all for tuning in for another week. Y'all know what it is. Stay you.
Stay real.
And stay humble. We'll catch y'all next week. Much love.